They assumed no one could hear them. Queen Camilla and her son Thomas Parker BS secret plans behind the locked doors of Clarence House that weren't written down. They wanted to get rid of the heirs to the kingdom, take the monarchy for themselves, and silence anyone who was in their path. But what they didn't know was that a royal guard was eavesdropping and had no intention to stay quiet. He didn't walk through the door and find stillness when he confronted them. He was hit with fists and lies, and a queen yelled treason before he could even say the truth. But by the end of the night, everything they tried to hide came out into the open. Before we show you how one guard found the most secret scheme in Clarence House, please make sure you are subscribed and have the bell icon switched on. Also, please leave a comment letting us know where you are watching from. What you're going to see could be the most shocking treachery ever to happen inside a palace. Unlike other buildings, Clarence House didn't sleep. It settled, creaked, and breathed through stone and plaster like something living but old, telling secrets to velvet curtains that hadn't moved in years. The east wing felt colder than the rest of the house. Always have. It was dark, with portraits on the walls that no one glanced at anymore, and runners on the floor that made every footfall seem muted. By 9 most nights it was deserted. Not tonight. Sergeant Arthur Drake walked along the service corridor by himself, his boots making no noise on the trademarked wool underneath him. He had learned how to hide even in full red after being a Coldstream guard for 18 years. He wasn't wearing ceremonial clothes tonight, though. He had to wear a dark overcoat, white gloves, and a sidearm holstered at his side for genuine, not just for show. He had been given a new job an hour ago. There is a problem with the evening transportation manifest. They explained it wasn't a big deal, just a formality. But the way the command came through, too casual, too vague, had been bothering him all night. By 9, the eastern corridor was expected to be empty, shut down, and clear. But as he turned the corner near Chamber 2L, the old reading chamber that Queen Elizabeth used to use, Alistair observed 3 things that didn't add up. First, the wall sconce outside the door was still on, with a dim amber glow that flickered a little. The timer had been turned off by someone. Second, there was an empty tray cart next to the door that had just been used. Nobody served meals in that wing anymore. Third, the voices were low and strained, not bickering, but sounding like they were planning something with anger and hurry. He couldn't understand the words yet, but he could tell that one voice was hers, Camilla's. The other one, who was a little slurred and full of himself, was Thomas Parker B.S. Alistair's eyes got smaller. He delicately laid his palm on the leather strap that went over his chest. There were no guards planned to be there after the corridor checkpoint. Definitely not anyone who can hear this room. He might go, file a report, and wait for orders. But something in his gut twisted. Break in the pattern. In Helmond, they termed it the moment something went wrong. The lights should be off. People talking in the wrong room. Too much silence. Alistair's didn't call it in. He moved to the side of the door to stay out of the light, let his back touch the paneling, then stood completely still with one ear tuned toward the voices behind the wall. He's not fit to rule, and everyone knows it. The first clear statement slipped out. It wasn't yelled or muttered. It was just said, like if a plan was already in motion. Alistair's pulse stayed the same, but his mind changed. He stayed still, letting the words seep through the plaster like poison through cloth. And with each statement he heard next, the hallway got quieter and quieter. He didn't know it yet, but that night would not finish in silence. It would end with a reckoning, a ghost of a man moving around the palace, like an old, soft priest. Camilla again, this time crisper, not muffled, and getting hotter. Alistair didn't move. He had been taught to stay still even when things got worse. Years ago, he had to hold his ground during a mortar attack with only sandbags and quiet. But these words hit differently. This wasn't a fight between royals. This was disrespect, and it was heavy. He can't even remember who he's talking to at a state dinner, she went on. Anne's the one keeping him up, and she does it like she's punishing everyone in the room. Thomas's voice was smug and slow. She's always been unbearable. Sent Anne off the stiff collar. No one outside the tabloids even likes her. I'd replace her with a bronze statue and a press release. Camilla laughed dryly. At least statues don't talk. The sound of glass clinking and a chair rocking back. And William, Thomas said next, he can barely control his own wife, let alone a commonwealth. The only reason anyone still listens to him is because of that damned face. He looks just like his mother. Camilla laughed. That's all they want, isn't it? A ghost in a suit. Another Diana to make them cry on cue. That's why they put Charlotte in those coats. so the public has something to coo over while they're busy. Alistair's jaw got tight. Then came the line that hit the hardest. George is a doll. They wave at him twice a year. The monarchy can't live on the smiles of kids. There was silence within. Not the type that made things cooler. The quiet of agreement. Thomas broke it. They're just placeholders. Legacy trophies. We're the ones who are still alive. Something behind Alistair's ribs moved. He had protected this place for 18 years, taking gunshots meant for diplomats, and standing through storms that broke stone. But nothing, not Helmand, not the riots of 2011, not the funeral processions had prepared him for this, for the rot pouring from inside. And this wasn't pride. This wasn't anger. This was a plan. Camilla's voice got quieter, like she was reading minutes from a plan. We can't wait for Charles to trip. We make the public want it. Dignity, maturity, stability, not fairy tale heirs, not foreign brides, and not awkward heirs. They need someone who can govern. Thomas laughed, and that person already wears a crown. Camilla didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Alistair's hand stayed at his side, but his mind was racing. This wasn't simply rude. This was a plan, and the crown had never been in more danger than from the people behind that door. They weren't making fun of the institution. They were getting ready to change it. They still think she's watching, Camilla said under her breath. Even now, even from the grave, Alistair's breathing became deeper, like it had been before. He understood exactly who she meant. Queen Elizabeth II. That whole generation still listens to her voice like it's the Bible. Camilla went on. They call it duty, legacy, and service. There was a pause. I call it a delusion. Thomas let out a slow breath, enjoying the boldness. And it is delusion. She clutched to the robes and crowns like they were magical objects, signs of a kingdom that was already falling apart. Camilla didn't fight back. I've seen more power in a televised charity gala than in one of her speeches to the Commonwealth. Then her tone changed to something sinister. She kept everything behind protocol, even her family, especially us. She left us crumbs. Ceremony, not control. Thomas leaned in, his voice full of anger. Now she's out of the way. There was a pause in the room. Alistair didn't move, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Those 5 words, so clear and definite, stung deeper than anything else. Camilla continued, this time in a quieter but clearer voice. Charles thinks he's carrying her flame, but all he's doing is standing in its ashes. Thomas laughed, and Anne, if she could, she'd tie the crown to a church pulpit. Camilla stated, William acts like a family man for the cameras, but the world doesn't need a prince with a pretty smile. They need a queen who knows how to rule. The ambition in her voice made the air thick. Thomas leaned in and said, we talk about it as continuity, strength, and the monarchy adapting to the modern world. And who, Camilla said with caution, guides that continuity? She didn't have to say it. Thomas did. You do. A stillness of utter agreement. Camilla then said, almost too nonchalantly, but I don't wear it alone. Thomas smiled. Good thing I look good in a dark suit. They both laughed. Not happiness. Possession. Camilla's voice became cold and clinical. We have the contacts, the Times, the mail, and even some on the inside, quiet ones, respected ones. The money is taken care of. You forget that I sit on more charity boards than the Bank of England has coins. She stopped for a moment, and then said with eerie accuracy, we start with whispers, worries about Charles's health, and subtle doubts about William's judgment. By spring, the story writes itself. Continuity needs experience, and experience already wears a crown. Thomas leaned back and smiled. When the Jubilee anniversary comes in June, we want to make sure everyone can see it, she added. We want to make sure that we honor Elizabeth's memory by making sure that the right people take over. It had been almost a minute since Alistair had blinked. They weren't just making plans. They had dates, a plan, and a schedule. This wasn't talk behind someone's back. This wasn't stress. This was a crime against the state. And the worst part was that they thought they were right. They wanted more than simply power. They believed they were entitled to it. Someone would have to stop them from inside if the monarchy was ever going to last. A quiet creak sound came from the hallway behind him. Alistair's head turned a little. Not much. But his gaze followed it. A young palace servant stepped out of the linen door at the end of the hall, just before the archway. They were carrying folded cloth and documents. The boy looked up and stopped. Alistair put one gloved finger to his lips, which was sharp and quiet, and then directed 2 fingers to the floor. Stay there. He then moved 1 foot into deeper shadow. The child did what he was told right away, but the change in the air inside the room didn't go unnoticed. Did you hear that? A chair moved back. There were footsteps on the floor. 1, 2, 3. Then there was stillness. Alistair pushed against the paneling just as the door opened a little bit. A small part of Thomas's face showed up. His eyes were sharp even though he was drinking, and he looked down the hall like a fox examining its trap. Alistair was not breathing. Thomas paused, moved deeper into the doorway, and looked to the left, then the right, and then back again. A beat went by. He then said, "Old house," to himself and went back inside. The door clicked shut. Alistair's fingers curled in. He now knew what he wanted. This would not be in any report. No chain of command would be quick enough. Every recording would be gone by dawn. Every servant would be quiet, and every murmur would be turned into slander. They would be the ones that got hurt. He would be the crazy one. If he didn't act immediately, Alistair's back straightened out. One boot moved forward. His hand was close to his side, but it wasn't his weapon. It was the small metal clasp on his breastplate that had been polished down over the years. He tapped it once out of habit, and then moved forward. 2 steps took him right to the door. He didn't knock. He opened it and went inside. Camilla and Thomas both turned quickly, their eyes wide and mouths open. They weren't surprised, they were scared. She was still sitting next to the fireplace, with her back half turned to a writing desk. Thomas was filling up another drink. At first, neither of them moved. It wasn't until Alistair closed the door behind him with a gentle, purposeful click that they did. "Be quiet." Then Camilla gently stood up, and the air around her froze. "What?" she asked, her voice colder than stone in the winter. "What are you doing in this wing?" Thomas moved up next to her and sneered. "You're not supposed to be here." Alistair didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His presence had already said more than any charge could. And for the first time in that room, Camilla looked scared. Not of violence or controversy, but of being found out. In a matter of seconds, Camilla's face went from shocked to angry. "You've gone too far," she snarled as she stepped closer. "This is a private home. You are not allowed in this wing, not at this time, and not under any circumstances." Thomas stood next to her, drink in hand, and straightened his shoulders in a drunken imitation of authority. "Do you think that uniform makes you untouchable?" Alistair didn't say anything. He stood up straight, with his shoulders back and his stance neutral. Camilla's eyes got smaller. "You have 10 seconds to leave that door before I make a call that ends your career." Alistair's voice was steady. "Mom, with all due respect, I'm not going anywhere." The hush that came after was like a gunshot. Thomas laughed loudly. "You must be crazy." But Alistair stayed still. He raised his chin a little, let his hands hang at his sides, and stared at the two of them. Camilla looked at her son and didn't look bewildered. It was planned. "Give him a lesson," she added in a quiet voice. Not a suggestion, but an order. Thomas thought about it for a moment before moving on. Alistair didn't say anything. Now that he has glass in one hand and a loose fist in the other, he's one step closer. Thomas remarked, "This is your last warning," and puffed up his chest. "Put your head down and go away, or I'll do it for you." Alistair blinked once. "Don't." Thomas lunged. His movements were awkward, and wrath and drink were pushing him instead of coordination. But the weight behind it was real. The glass came up like a blunt weapon and hit Alistair in the head. Alistair moved once. Exactly. He shifted to the side, grasped Thomas's wrist mid-swing with his left hand, twisted the joint backward, not enough to break it, just enough to force the release, and swept his leg behind Thomas's foot in one smooth motion. The Queen Consort's son fell to the floor with a dull thud. The glass broke, the elbow cracked the tile, and the knee bent awkwardly under him. He made a shocked moan as he breathed out. One of the pieces had cut his hand. There was blood on the smooth stone. Alistair stood over him, serene, straight, and unshaken. His breathing was still the same. Thomas writhed and then gasped, putting one hand on his hip. Camilla yelled, "You hurt my son." Alistair didn't say anything. "You've attacked us," she yelled, her voice high. "Now you broke into a royal room in the middle of the night and attacked the Queen Consort and her heir." Thomas was still on the floor, jaws clenched, cursing under his breath between painful breaths. Camilla was already walking toward the phone on the side table. "You will lose every medal you've ever worn," she said angrily. "Every barracks will erase your name. If you're lucky, you'll be guarding a parking garage by Christmas." But Alistair stayed quiet, and in that moment he got what she was doing, bending the truth quickly, ruthlessly, and believably so that no one else could hear what she and her son had said behind closed doors. She was turning treason into self-defense and rebellion into royal victimhood. If no one stopped her, she would get away with everything. Before her son could even sit up, Camilla held the phone in her hand. She yelled into the phone. "I want security now. A royal guard has attacked this house. Yes, he's still here in person." Thomas whimpered behind her, his arm folded across his ribs. Alistair didn't move, beg, or raise his voice. He only said, "I heard everything." Camilla stopped moving. Alistair's voice stayed calm, incisive, and purposeful. "I heard you make fun of His Majesty. I heard you call Princess Anne a relic. I heard your son say, the monarchy needs adult faces, not children's smiles." Each statement was like a soldier counting rounds, a break. The words' weight filled the air. "I heard you say Princess Charlotte should be erased, and that Prince George was a doll to wind up." Camilla's hand shook as she held the receiver. Footsteps that were muted and coming quickly but not sure of their destination were heard beyond the passageway. Alistair moved closer, not in a frightening sense, but just close enough that she couldn't look away. "And I heard you say," he went on, "that Queen Elizabeth is finally out of the way." Thomas, still on the floor, yelled, "He's lying." Alistair turned to him and spoke in a flat voice. "I can say every word you said again, every single one." Thomas tried to get up, but he winced and held his side. "You don't get to question us. You're a guard, and you do what you're told." "I follow the crown," Alistair said, "not conspirators." Camilla slapped the phone down, her face blanched with anger. "Do you really think anyone will believe you? You came in here and hurt my son?" "I acted in self-defense," Alistair remarked calmly, pointing to the broken glass near Thomas's hand. "And there are people who saw it. Staff in the hallway. They heard you talking." Outside the room, quiet had settled in, dense and listening. One of the senior aides of the family had come and was standing still in the doorway. Two younger staff members behind him kept their heads down, but their eyes were wide with shock and recognition. Camilla's calmness faded even further. "You don't get what you've done." "Oh," Alistair remarked in a quiet voice. "I do." Thomas's voice was full of anger as he said, "You'll regret this, you little tin soldier. You think you're going to expose the monarchy? You are the monarchy's shame." Alistair gazed down at him. He answered, "You're not the monarchy. You're the rot under it." Camilla stepped forward, her jaw tight. "I'll see you court-martialed, shamed, and erased from every record before breakfast." But Alistair didn't flinch. The door behind them creaked open wider, and more staff were looking now. The lies they had once been afraid of were falling apart by the second. The footfall were quick, leather shoes on polished stone, steady but eager. Then the voice said, "Where is he?" As King Charles walked through the door, it opened up, and two of his senior advisors struggled to keep up. His overcoat was still hanging unevenly over one shoulder, as if he hadn't completed getting ready. He didn't look like a king. It was harsh, red, and boiling over with anger and confusion. "What the hell is going on?" Before everybody else, Camilla moved. She brushed past Alistair as if he weren't there, and ran over to Charles as if she were grabbing a lifeline. "He attacked us," she yelled, holding on to the king's arm. "Charles, he broke into our private meeting in the middle of the night and threw your son to the ground." Charles became stiff. "What?" "He's gone crazy," she said, her voice rising and her breath quickening. "He's always been cold, you know that? That's weird. But tonight he broke in without saying a word and attacked Thomas." Thomas groaned and struggled to his feet behind her, leaning against the wall. His shirt was untucked, his jaws crimson, and his pride was even worse. Alistair stood still with his hands at his sides. Charles's eyes were fixed on him. The monarch inquired, "Is that true?" in a low, scary voice. Alistair didn't move. "No, sir." Charles's forehead got darker. "Then tell me what you mean." Alistair drew a breath, not to defend, but to show. "I went into the room after hearing private speech that directly insults the crown," he stated. "Some of the things said were that your majesty is unfit to rule, that Princess Anne is no longer needed, and that Prince William is weak." Camilla gasped in a dramatic way. "This is crazy." But Alistair kept going, her voice solid as stone. She said, "That Prince George and Princess Charlotte should be erased from public life entirely, that their props, dolls, symbols to wind up twice a year, her words, should be removed." The people who worked with Charles glanced up quickly. One of them stopped moving completely. Charles turned pale. The room got quiet. Camilla laughed once, and it was brief and sharp. "He's lying." Alistair didn't move. "You said that Queen Elizabeth is finally out of the way and called yourself the rightful king." Thomas spoke now, trying to take control of the story. "He's twisting it. We weren't talking about treason. We were talking about legacy, public opinion, and the press." Alistair looked at Charles. "Sir, they were plotting, not grieving or serving." The monarch did not answer right away. He stared at Camilla, then Thomas, then Alistair again. "Are there any witnesses?" he inquired. Someone in the hallway answered, "Yes, sir." Everyone looked. The senior aide was gray-haired, devoted, and old enough to recall Windsor's best years. He carefully walked into the door and nodded once. "We heard most of it." Two more people came into view behind him, a junior secretary who was pale and shaking, and Alistair, the young footman who had been quieted earlier. His eyes were wide but steady, and he was no longer terrified. Charles gazed at them, and then back at Camilla. His face changed, but not in a way that showed he believed. It got worse. Doubt that shakes the ground. "All of you," Charles said in a low voice. The footman nodded. "Every word, Your Majesty, about Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and the Queen." His voice broke a little. "All of it." Camilla's mouth opened and then closed again. Her eyes darted to Thomas, who appeared like a man watching a door slam open under him. Charles stopped doubting at that point, because he couldn't find the one thing he could forgive: his love for his grandchildren. The man who was accused of assault was the only one in the room who was fighting for them. King Charles's face had changed. Not angry or stormy anymore. Just still. The quiet of someone who just realized the enemy wasn't outside the gates but inside the room. He replied softly, without looking at her, "Camilla, please tell me it's not true." She opened her mouth to say something else, but nothing came out. She thought about it for a moment. Then came the turn. "We were just talking about what could happen," she continued, changing her tone as if she were putting on silk gloves. "Strategic talks about survival and relevance. You know how weak the monarchy's public image is." Charles's eyes shot to her. "I told you to deny it, not to explain it." She blinked because she was astonished by how sharp his voice was. Thomas spoke up to attempt to make things better. "You're overreacting," their words. "Everyone vents in private, but don't we all agree that things need to change?" Slowly, Charles turned to him. Thomas pushed forward, sure of his own reasoning. "The crown needs modern minds and real leaders, not bows and ribbons and hiding behind kids with rehearsed smiles." "Be quiet." There was no sound. Even the people working in the hallway stopped breathing. Charles stepped forward, slowly and on purpose. He spoke with a shaky voice. "Thomas, they're kids." His son-in-law stood there, transfixed and staring. Camilla moved but didn't say anything. "They're my grandkids," Charles said, his voice getting louder as he spoke. "And you called them dolls, props, and things to erase." He looked back at Camilla. "And you stood there. You didn't stop him." Her jaw was tight. Charles yelled, "You're twisting this." "No," louder than anybody else in the room had heard in years. "Don't you dare say that he changed anything." He pointed at Alistair, who hadn't moved an inch. This man, Charles added, was the only one in this palace who knew who the crown was for. Camilla's hands turned into fists. "So that's it. You trust a foot soldier more than your queen?" Charles answered in a chilly voice, "No. I'll believe a man who defended the heirs of this house while you plotted to tear it down from the inside." Thomas lost it. "You've always been too soft." Charles moved closer, his eyes on him. "Say something else." Thomas swallowed whatever comeback was coming to him. Camilla's shoulders drooped, not because she had lost, but because she was thinking. She realized that something was coming apart, and that it couldn't be fixed tonight. The king took a deep breath, and then turned to Alistair. "What you heard, what you saw, what you stopped," he said, his voice hard now. "It doesn't just matter. It might have saved the crown." Alistair just gave a slight nod. The monarch stood up straight, and fixed the hem of his coat. "Nothing said in this room will leave it from now on, not through palace channels or family whispers. There will be protocol again." He looked at Camilla and Thomas, and as for you, he didn't continue, because sometimes silence speaks more than words. Camilla stood completely still, staring at Charles with a mouth full of rage that she couldn't use as a weapon anymore. Thomas leaned back into the chair behind him, one hand on his wounded ribs, and the other hanging down. All the poison that had been on his face was gone. There was nothing left of the entitlement, except the faint blush of a guy who thought he would get a crown but saw it turn to ash. Charles looked back at Alistair. "Your full statement," he added, his voice quieter now, but still sounding like something older and tougher than wrath, "will be taken, logged, and sent directly to the Lord Chamberlain without any changes." Alistair bowed a little, not out of respect, but because he agreed. Camilla's voice came back, breathless and trying to find her footing. "You can't be serious. You're making this act of aggression seem okay. You're trusting a ceremonial statue more than your own wife and son." Charles didn't move. He talked in a low voice. "No. I'm trusting the one person in this room who knows what it means to serve." She closed her eyes. "You're putting your family in danger." Charles turned his head slowly. You put yourself in a bad position when you said George was just a prop. She flinched. Thomas tried to save it, but his voice was breaking at the edges. We were talking about strategy, not feelings. You've said worse things in private. Everyone has, Charles answered. Not about my grandchildren. Not about them. There was a beat. Charles then looked at the senior aide, who was still standing quietly at the doorway. Send out a security note. Sergeant Drake's movements tonight should not be flagged or questioned. If he tripped any surveillance, erase it. If any disciplinary action is brought up, burn it. The aide nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. Camilla laughed bitterly. Now you're pushing him. Charles didn't say anything. He had to meet Alistair again. From now on, he said clearly, you'll report directly to my office. No rotation, no parade watch. You're under my personal command. Alistair didn't grin. He didn't pump out his chest or enjoy the change. He just nodded his head, like he always did. Camilla's hands shook at her sides. You'll regret this. You think the press won't find out. You think the cabinet won't talk. This looks weak. Charles looked at her for a long time before turning back to the aide. Make sure that every word of his statement is time-stamped, safe, and marked as verified by the king. The assistant nodded. Got it. Thomas opened his mouth, but Charles lifted one hand and stopped him without saying a word. You've said enough for tonight, he remarked softly. Finally, Charles turned his back on both of them. The center of authority changed just like that, with no thunder or fanfare. Not because a man yelled, but because a soldier didn't. As he left the room, Alistair didn't look back. He didn't have to. Clarence House stood behind him in shocked stillness. In the hallway, staff members stepped aside for him, not out of fear, but out of something older and rarer, respect. He walked by the same wall he had leaned on just a few minutes before, but the air felt different now, lighter, as if something nasty had finally been cut out. The senior aide walked 2 steps behind without saying anything. A formality, but not one that doesn't mean anything. Camilla stayed transfixed beside the hearth with her arms crossed and her voice gone. Thomas sat slumped on a chair, holding his side, his face red and small. King Charles was alone by the window, where the moonlight made his reflection shine. He didn't say anything, and he didn't have to. The message had already been given, not to Parliament or the press, but to the Crown itself. It said that it would not be passed down to those who murmured behind closed doors, but would be protected by those who stood still and listened. Alistair got to the top of the stairs. The second footman nodded at him with wide eyes. There were no words. They didn't have to. The outfit he wore now had meaning again, and the institution had just remembered who it belonged to. Would you step in or stay quiet if you heard a plot like this? Was it too late for King Charles to do something? Or did he get there just in time? If you think the crown should never be treated like a game of inheritance, hit that like button. With the ring on, you may subscribe so you never miss what truly goes on inside royal walls. And tell this story to someone who still knows what Queen Elizabeth stood for. Your next tale is already on the screen, so go see it now. We upload every day at the same time,